community, during our February call and response session, we talked a lot about classrooms, containers, the spaces that we've been in that have been sites for learning. And the first question that I asked of the community gathered there was, what classrooms have you been in? And what role have those classrooms played in your development? Now, when we talked about classrooms, we could be talking about literal classrooms, spaces of traditional learning, or other spaces where learning inevitably occurred, but they may not have been traditional classrooms. In response to that question, one of the members of our community offered this really beautiful thought that everyone reacted to in the moment positively, and I could tell resonated deeply with everyone. And what she said was, quote, "Our highest place of learning as women of color has been in community." I love that for so many reasons. One of the key things I love is that in community, there is opportunity with folks who share, maybe not all of, but some of our lived experiences. There is opportunity to come away from this space that toxic capitalistic culture, white supremacy culture, white dominant culture, and all its partners, as we like to say in call and response, dictate need to be spaces of proving that you know something. One of the things I love most about call and response as a space is that we ask questions in that space. 9 times out of 10, when a question is posed either by myself as facilitator or by someone else in the community as co-facilitator, it's often answered with another question, which I think is so beautiful and so profound. But what I take away from that is that there is a conscious effort, or potentially unconscious to effort being made to buck that narrative that says knowing is more valuable than asking, which is something that toxic capitalism in particular perpetuates constantly. We are valuable in as much as we know and we can say for sure. When the reality is the experience of women of color is deeply complex. And so part of what I think, and I'll share some more about this soon, is a function of self-love for us, is being willing to ask questions and being willing to say in community with others, I don't know, but this is the question that I'm asking. I feel that when we ask questions, we insist on being our most human selves, and we also give the status quo a run by refusing to fall in line. This quarter, so up through the next call and response session, our focus is on unlearning conceptually. As I said, a lot of times the questions that are posed then give way to and invite other questions from folks in community. So one of the questions that came in response to this question again was, once I have unlearned something, Rachel, what do I replace it with? I thought that was such a profound question. And the way it sat with me, because I had to sit with it for about a week after the session, when I thought about how that plays in my own life, what I realized, one of the things I'm unlearning every day is the need to be, or the perceived need to be, the deposited need to be impressive. That comes from, and it took me a long time to understand where that came from when it started to surface again. As many of you know, I no longer operate at this part of my career in the nonprofit space. I don't work within an institution in that way. And yet I'm realizing that a lot of the culture of those spaces I've brought with me into my own container without realizing it. And this focus on being impressive is one. For me, that comes, I'm sure, from many places, but particularly from having been a fundraiser. I was an executive director for some time in 2 different moments of my career. And I learned both tacitly and also directly in that space that my success as a Black woman fundraiser would be directly tied to my ability to be impressive, typically to white people with money. I just want to pause on that for a second, because every time I say it, it hurts. But if I'm being honest with myself, that was my education in the classroom that I was in when I was learning how to be a fundraiser. That was the cut through message. And so to this question asked by one of the folks again in community, once I've unlearned something, what do I replace it with? For me, the answer is always relative to this thing that I'm dealing with around being impressive, where you replace it with authenticity. Now, I have not unlearned this piece about needing to be impressive. It shows up almost everywhere. And so I also want to posit that there may not be a start and an end to the process of unlearning, right? We may always be unlearning something, but if we know what we want to replace it with, we can see it for what it is, and we can pull that part of us that's like, no, your job is not to be impressive. Your job is to be authentic. I tell myself that probably 17 times a day. It's also very easy in that space to judge myself. I'm learning, however, that asking questions of myself actually feels very loving. And so the question that I ask myself more than anything, where did you learn this? And what value does it have for you right now? That second question in particular always gets me to a place of, so Rachel, you ain't got to do that anymore. Release it. Doesn't leave me immediately, and it's definitely easier said than done, but it is a starting point. Again, this is why I love this space so much and why I feel so thankful for the folks that gather in it every month. And I hope you will consider joining too, because we are not afraid to ask the questions. And those questions that we ask become community property. And I believe allow folks to move through their own challenges by remembering that they are not the only people contending with those questions, and remembering that the questions are how we get to the answers about how we move forward and how we step by step regain more and more and more of our humanity.